Good day everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. And in this edition, we are going to be hopefully answering the question, how do agro farms and fields work? Because as you look at trying to produce agricultural products, in fact, even as we tried to do in early videos, create a livestock industry, we came across some really spectacular numbers about how much grain you needed to actually produce full production in livestock farms. And we didn't really know how it all operated together. So today is, well, I could have called it R&D really, but it's a look at how agro farms, fields and grain silos actually all function together. And to do that, I've started up a new episode and I've come back to the Bereslaw and Smolyadzeka area, and we're going to set up some research today and have a look at different things. So the title is, as I think I just mentioned, Agro Farms, Fields and Grain Silos, how on earth do they all work together? So what I'm going to do is I'm setting up a couple of different test scenarios. But initially what I'm going to do is set up 3 agro farms. One agro farm will be connected to one large field. One agro farm will be connected to one medium field. And one agro farm will be connected to a small field. And what we hope to do by doing this is get definitive numbers for the time it takes to produce crops and how many crops you produce when you do it. So that's what we're about today. And in the background, you can see we're starting to lay the fields, and then we'll be putting in the farms that operate those fields. Now, of course, we will also be connected to Bereslaw, the electricity supply from the NATO, and they will be powering our fields. No, sorry, not our fields, our farms. So, just to recap, initially only one field of each type was connected to each farm, or will be connected to each farm. And we're going to have a look now, while this is just going ahead in the background, let's talk about what we actually did. So when I built each agro farm, I included a grain silo which was attached automatically to the agro farm. And as previously mentioned, the power was supplied via the NATO side. Now, as neither the agro farm nor the attached grain silo required any workers, there was no need for any other infrastructure except for electricity. Now, it's also worth noting that as I ran the scenario, I noticed that the electricity supply from the NATO border cost actually nothing to run. And I say this because during the production run, when no money was being spent on anything other than electricity, there was no deduction at all from the reserves of money we had in the bank. So I conclude from that we weren't being charged for our power, which I don't know what impact that will have in the main game, but that's what we found out here. Now, in addition to this, I want to have a look at the fields. So we used the 3 types, as I said, the large, the medium and the small. Now it turns out that a large field is 4.81 hectares, and you can only find this out when you place the field on the map. You can't find this out in the menu for the actual fields themselves. So 4.81 for a large field, 1.57 hectares for a medium field. And that means that a medium field is roughly 3.06 medium fields will take up one large field. And then the small field, which is 0.39 hectares. Now, it will take 4.03 small fields to add up to one medium field, or 12.33 small fields to make up one large field. That's in terms of the actual hectare size of the field. Now, it's also worth noting too that later on in the testing scenario, I took a particular field and placed it on the map so that the entire field wasn't green. Now, what I mean when I say this is that when you take the field and you position it over the map, there are certain positions you get to where the entire field goes red, which means you can't place it. And then there are other times where you place it and the whole field is coloured green. And then there are cases where trying to place a field, say most of the field is green, but part of the field will have no colour in it at all, except for the small dots that identify the level of the field. And I always assumed when I saw this, trying to place it on a map, that the field wouldn't be able to use that non-green area. So, for example, if, say, a quarter of the field wasn't green, but just neutral colour, that you would lose a quarter of the production of the field. Well, it turns out that's not what happens. In a test I do later on with the medium field, I found out that you still get the full production value from the field, i.e. 100% of the hectare available is used, and you get all the crops. Now, I calculated this out not by hectares, of course, but by the actual tonne of grain produced by the field. Now, even though I only did it with a medium field, I'm assuming that that will be the same with all the fields. So my conclusion is that you either get the entire value of the field produced or no value at all because you can't place the field. So that's that. Now, also, it's just worth noting that when the agro farms are built, we connect everything up, and that is to say we connect up the agro farm to their fields using the gravel road, so there's consistency there. And I have tried to keep the agro farms approximately the same distance from the first field where we do the testing, because that is important because it adds to the timing involved in actually doing the test runs. So that's quite important to note as well. Right. So what I did was I build the farms and I build the power supply and I build the grain silos and the roads. We get everything ready up to and including the end of January. Now, I think from memory, it's the 1st of February, I allocate 3 vehicles to each of the agro farms that we'll be using in our testing. And that is, we add 1 tractor for sowing, 1 harvester for harvesting, and 1 truck with a 10-tonne capacity to transport the grain from the field to the agro farm. Now, we are not transporting or transferring grain anywhere after it reaches each individual agro farm, and then it goes straight into the grain silo. Although interestingly enough, not all the grain goes into the grain silo, and some of every delivery remains in the farm. And I'm going to have to look at this separately to find out what happens with that particular grain when grain is removed from the silo next to it, because we actually didn't do that in this test scenario. Okay, and I also have to say that I've needed to make allowance for the timing in the particular cycles of each field. Each field goes through 3 cycles. The first cycle is the crops are sown. The second cycle is the crops grow. And the third cycle is the crops are harvested. However, there is a delay, a visible delay, even though it may be a half a day or a quarter of a day in game time, between when particular things start and finish. So, for example, if the crop stops growing first thing in the morning, the harvester can get there by the end of the day. Whereas if the crops don't finish growing until almost the last thing at night, the harvester won't get there till the next day. So you can have a variation of an entire day every time you get a cycle. So the numbers that I give are, I would have to say, ballpark numbers. And the other thing that changes, and it changes quite dramatically, is that the further away the field is from the agro farm, and the further the vehicle has to travel to get there, that actually increases the delay and therefore the time in each cycle. So these are possibly best case scenario cycles. So here we go, everybody. Let me tell you what we found. We found that a large field takes 24 days to sow, 53 days for growing, and 55 days to complete harvesting. The medium field takes 9 days for a complete sowing, 53 days to complete growing. Well, you would certainly hope that all sizes of fields take the same amount of time to grow, because, you know, the plant doesn't speed up or anything because the field gets bigger or smaller. And then again, the medium field, 19 days to complete harvesting. The small field, it only takes 3 days to sow, again 53 days for growing, and 6 days to harvest. So if you were going to look at a cycle, now each field cycle is sow, grow and harvest, right? So you get the following. A large field cycle is 132 days. Now, I'm using averages here because I divided up months, and there are just over 30 days in a month. So a large field of 132 days for one full cycle. That means nigh on 19 weeks or 4 1/3 months. So 18.9 weeks or 4.3 months. A medium field takes approximately 81 days to complete one full cycle. That's 11.6 weeks or 2.7 months. And a small field takes 62 days for a full cycle. So that means just over 2 months, and you get to repeat the cycle. So that 62 days is 8.9 weeks, 9 weeks, or 2.03 months. Now, importantly, at the end of each cycle, we get the following tonnes out of our fields. A large field produces 120.14 tonnes. The medium field produces 39.22 tonnes. And the small field produced 9.81 tonnes. Now, for those of you who love a little bit more of the statistics, interestingly, the yield per hectare for the large and medium fields is the same, roughly, at 24.98 tonne per hectare and 24.97 tonne per hectare, whereas the small field actually yields slightly more at 25.2 tonne per hectare, or, roughly speaking, an additional 2.2 tonne per hectare. Not much, but it's an interesting variation. So, now, what does this actually mean? Well, it means that in the space of 1 year, a large field will go through 2.77 cycles. It will produce 240.8 tonnes each year, except in every fifth year, of course, if I've got these numbers right, in which it will produce 360.42 tonnes. A medium field can go through 4.5 cycles every year. It will produce 176.49 tonnes each odd year, that is the first, third, fifth, 7th, 9th, 11th year and so on. And every even year, the 2nd, the 4th, the 6th, etc., it will produce 196.1 tonnes. Now this, of course, this variation is because it's partial completion every year. And a small field is the busiest of them all. It goes through 5.89 cycles. It will produce 49.05 tonnes each odd year, 1, 3, 5, 7, and every even year, 2, 4, 6, 8, it will produce 58.86 tonnes. Wow, numbers are just coming out of everywhere. Right. Now, there's 2 more additional things I would like to tell you. And the first one is, when I first got into playing the game, I don't know why, but I was under the assumption that a field, an agro farm, could only have 5 fields attached to it. Now, I don't know where I got that number from, but I did decide to sit down and have a look and see how many fields you could actually attach to a farm. And to be honest, I was expecting, a less than 10 number. So I used the small fields and I started attaching them. And I got up to 30 small fields attached to one agro farm. And it just looked like I could keep adding them. Now, when I pulled up the, I call it the information card for the agro farm, and down the bottom it lists the fields that are attached to it, all the fields that I could see actually ran off the page. And I couldn't scroll up or down to verify that the other fields were actually attached. So what I did was I clicked on every field that I had, attached to the farm, and each field said it was attached to that agro farm. So I can't tell you how many fields you can attach to a farm, but it's a lot. And the size of the field won't matter because, the registration of a farm to a field is not dependent on its, in-game size. It's just a slot. So how big that is or how many you can attach, I really don't know. But you can attach a lot. So that's interesting. And I also noticed something about the behaviour of vehicles during the game. Now, later on in the episode when I'm doing the experimentation and I'm adding more fields, the vehicles tend to behave a little bit differently. So, for example, I have, say, 3 small fields attached to a farm, and the guy doing the sowing has completed the first field. And that first field happens to be the closest field to the agro farm. What he does is he comes out of that field and goes back to the entrance driveway, not into the actual farm itself, but just to the entrance driveway, and then he turns around at the entrance driveway and goes to the next field that he needs to do. But I've noticed that when the field is further away, and how much further away I can't really tell, but there is a distance factor involved, the tractor seems to come out and go partially back towards the agro farm and then turns around and goes and does the next field is on his list of things to do. So that's one thing. Now, the other thing I'd like to let you know is that I also did an experiment to see what happens if you leave crops on a field. So I set up a medium field and had a sower and a harvester, but not a truck, to collect the crops in the field and transport them back to the agro farm. It turns out that they stay on the field. And in fact, I had up to 3 cycles of crops sitting on the field waiting for someone to come and pick them up. So 3 cycles worth of crops sitting on a field waiting for a truck to pick them up, and they didn't perish. Well, that's good, because that means that if you set up a farm and you have trouble getting around the farm to collect all your crops, that they're not going to go to waste or perish, because they apparently have preservatives added to them. Now, this has given us a good idea of numbers, and it's given us some things that we can work with in terms of, for example, that we were doing in the previous set of episodes. We were trying to calculate out how much grain we needed to keep a livestock farm running for an entire year. We know that we needed to produce 5 tonne of livestock every day. We needed 10 tonne of grain. But I was working under the assumption, of course, that an entire year would have to pass before you get one cropping. So, you sow, and then the growing period, and then the harvesting period. Then you go fallow for 4 months, and then you repeat and rinse, right? So basically, that's not the case. And it also depends what type of fields you're using as to when those grains arrive. So I want to do another episode after this, but may take a bit longer to do. So you may not see any Workers and Resources Soviet Republic for a little while, but I do want to do an episode looking at possibly what in my mind might be an efficient setup to keep a constant supply of grain up for what it is you're trying to do. Now, obviously, if your goal is to sell across the border just grain, then really it's more of a budgetary consideration, because it's not an efficiency issue, because you get paid when you sell it and the price varies, so it's no good trying to predict the market. However, if you have a facility like we were looking at, which is setting up livestock production, then you don't want a situation where you're getting a glut of crop grain and then no grain, because that's affecting the production all along your chain. So you've got built-in inefficiency there. And you might say, well, it's simple, you just go small. But not necessarily. Not necessarily. That may not be the best way to go, because the fields are turning over so quickly. You need many more vehicles to make it all run together and work. So that's what I want to do. I want to go and have a look at that, and I also want to go and have a look at what happens to that grain in the agro farm that's not transferred to the silo. And that's an important question, because in the game I'm going to send trucks to the silo to pick up grain, not the farm. So I'm really not sure what happens with that, but I'd like to look at that as a separate issue. So that's it. This has really been a spreadsheet episode, but I hope that it gives you some numbers to work with when you're playing the game and planning different things out. Because you know what? It's all very helpful. So I hope you're able to use these numbers when you play Workers and Resources Soviet Republic, and I hope they help you. In the meantime, stay well, and I will look forward to seeing you all, as I always say, in a gig channel, which is the Grumpiest Gamer channel. Until then, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all later. Bye.